Listen, I'm gonna call us to order. I know we'll have a few more people join us as we're getting started here. Welcome, good afternoon, good morning to everyone from around the country joining for this call. As I said at the top of the hour, this is our third in a series of field consultations on the executive orders promulgated by the president a couple weeks back. And we're really using these sessions to gather field input, ideas, which will be compiled into a set of recommendations that we'll be making back to the Trump administration as it goes to work on implementing these executive orders. Let me just give a little bit of background on what we're going to do today, and then I'm going to turn this over to Harry Leach, who's going to kick off the presentation portion of this session. Denise, do you want to just flip the slide here? We're going to start with, it says here 20 minutes, but it might just stretch a little bit longer to provide a little bit of context on the executive orders and on the opportunity to talk about occupational standards and guidelines. And I want to just say right at the outset that in fact the executive orders say very little on this. There's one reference in the artificial intelligence executive order, which Harry will go over with you. But frankly, we took that as an opportunity to continue to push on the need for these occupational standards and guidelines as a critical part of scaling apprenticeship in the United States. So if we're to achieve the president's goal of 1 million active apprentices, we know that occupational standardization and guidelines for occupations is really going to be a critical part of that equation. So you're going to have a chance to hear both about the executive order and then also get a little bit of an update on what's happening in the field on this with speakers from the Urban Institute and Josh Laney from Alabama, who's setting up a new structure that's going to be advancing some of this, and he'll give you the details on that. We'll run for about an hour. So after the presentations, we're going to open this up for conversation. I want to just say throughout the presentations and as we're in conversation, please make use of the chat. This is a great way to have to share ideas, get quick ideas in. If you're interested in saying a word or two about the topic at hand, we hope you will. Just raise your hand, use the raise hand feature in Zoom to let us know that you'd like to speak. And if you're not able to do that for whatever reason, just put a note in the chat that you're interested in adding a comment, and we'll try to recognize you. We are going to be recording these sessions, and we'll be distributing those a link to the recording and slides from the session by way of follow-up. And so I think with that as our background here, I'm going to turn this over to Harry Leach, who's going to walk us through the executive orders and a little context here. Harry.
Great. Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm going to give a bit of context on what the executive orders say on standards and regulation and why we think standards and guidelines are important to scale. And then we'll hear from John Marotta from the Urban Institute on what they've done in this space, and then Josh Laney about his new project. So starting with what's in the executive orders, just to make a few points up front. Firstly, as John said, there's not that much reference to standards in the executive orders. It's pretty light. There's one sentence in the AI executive order that the Secretary of Labour should support the creation of industry-developed program standards to be registered on a nationwide basis, enabling individual employers to adopt the standards without requiring individual registry. So not much content, but we think it's an important area. It's been a policy position of ours for a while. There's been lots of activity in this space. On the wording, it's a bit open to interpretation. I think some people have read that and been a bit worried about the phrasing of without requiring individual registry. Is this, a return to IRAPs? Is this, could this weaken the registered system? Our interpretation is that very much isn't the case. This isn't about bypassing registration. If that's what they intended, they would have they could have just said that. And then the rest of the executive order is very strong on registered. We pulled out the wording there at the top that talked about protecting registered apprenticeships. So what we think this is about enabling multi-employer intermediaries to run programs across the country with multiple employers without going through multiple processes, which we think is key for scale. Final point on executive orders. So we're going to focus mainly on standards today, but this is really part of a broader question about is our regulatory approach, our approach to compliance, suitable, fit for a scaled up system. So we should bring into the conversation if there's other elements away from standards that we think it could be barriers to expansion or an important part of the discussion here. We should use this as an opportunity to bring those up as well. Skipping ahead to slide 6, going to quickly talk about why AFA cares about this, what the pros and cons of guidelines or standards are. Firstly, what they are. I think we all know, we all use program standards. They set out the required skills, knowledge, behaviors for competency in an occupation. A national standard is, very similar to that. You just have it on a national basis. They tend to set out some of the details of how they're going to be delivered, the length of time for the program, details about the instruction. In other countries, they set out funding. This is the kind of standard approach in other countries is to use national occupational standards. So Germany, Switzerland, France, England all have some kind of version of this that's national. They tend to be written with groups of employers in that industry or occupation. There's different ways to do that. Switzerland does it through trade associations. I'll talk about how England does it in a little bit. But they tend to, the content comes from and is agreed by panels and groups of employers. Why we think they're a good thing? The main point is about consistent quality control. You set a baseline or a floor for the type of training an apprentice gets. We know it's good. We know it's going to lead to good outcomes. And then what we're interested in this context is really about efficiency. So how can we move towards a world where you don't need to redesign the wheel every time you start a new program? You can pick a standard off the shelf that you know is good. And also for the apprentice, it's important. It makes the training more transferable when you've got consistent standards across an occupation, as opposed to kind of by employer. That is better for the apprentice and makes their qualification and training more applicable. There can be disadvantages. Definitely in England, when I was involved in this, we had quite a tough time keeping national standards up to date as skills needs and industries change. And there's a debate to be had about how suitable they are, especially in the US. Can they match local and regional contexts if you're looking at it as a national approach? Certainly, I don't think any country has kind of got this completely 100% perfect, but there's definitely lessons to be learned. And then on the next slide, just to give a bit of a practical example of what this looks like, I'm going to quickly talk through how it works in England. This is a good example, not because it's a perfect system, but because it's quite recent. So England moved, we used to have these things called frameworks. We moved to having national occupational standards in 2017, and it took about 4 or 5 years. We've now got standards that cover the majority of apprentices. How it works, so there's a body, IFA, it's an independent, non-governmental body, Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education. It oversees the system. It runs the process of getting employers together in employers and training providers together in trailblazer groups that then do the work of putting together and validating the standard. These are sorted into 15 different occupational routes, which are really kind of industry groupings. This is helpful because you can see progression from one standard. You can then see what are the potential jobs you can go on to in the future, what are other apprenticeships, non-apprenticeship qualifications in that world. And today there's just over 900 standards, so it covers most occupations in England. that set out all the details. It's quite small on the slide, but if you see there, it says the level, that's the kind of level of education, beginner, intermediate, advanced type of thing. The length of time, minimum length of time that it takes, and the funding level. Great. So that's all I was going to say up front. So we're now going to turn to recent developments in the US in the standards and guidelines world. So first up, we've got John Marotta, who's going to talk about the work Urban Institute have done over the last few years. So I'm going to pass over to you, John.
Thanks, Harry. Hi, everyone. John Marotta. I'm a senior policy associate at the Urban Institute, and I have been the project manager for our RATA Center of Excellence on Occupations and Standards. We are in the final 6 weeks of this 4-year award. And the kind of goal, our kind of North Star throughout these last 4 years has been to build this gold standard occupational skills infrastructure to increase the transparency, portability, quality, and scalability of the national apprenticeship system. And we've had kind of three primary goals. One being to create at least 80 national occupational frameworks. The second, to build the Registered Apprenticeship Standards Library, both of which I'll talk a little bit more about in a couple minutes. And then our third goal has been to document best practices through different publications and other resources. Go to the next slide. So for those who aren't familiar with the National Occupational Frameworks, just building off of what Harry was just discussing, they're essentially the closest thing that the US has to national standards. They are not required, and they're not tied to any specific employer or sponsor. So each of the frameworks has three main kind of components. One is an occupational overview that just describes what the occupation is, prerequisites, length of training, a lot of stuff that gets pulled from ONET, to be honest. The second section is the work process schedule. So I'm sure you're all familiar with a work process schedule, and the way we have them organized is by job functions and then competencies. So most of the frameworks have around 5 to 10 major job functions, which are kind of categories of skills, and then specific competencies underneath each of those, which outline the skills and competencies someone would need to master to be proficient in that occupation. And then the final section is a related instruction outline, which has a suggested course outline, information about potential training providers. That one is far more suggestive in terms of basically here's a starting point, or here's some things to consider for shaping your related instruction for this occupation, for this program. So the process that we go through to create those essentially is one or two people on our team will start doing a bunch of research. If it's an apprenticeable occupation, they'll gather existing work processes. If it's not, they'll find other sources, pulling information from ONET, from credentialing organizations, job postings, a ton of different sources, and then distilling it into that work process schedule and the related instructional outline. And then we engage a group of at least 7 experts from that field, which can include individual employers, industry groups, training providers, workforce and apprenticeship professionals, unions. It's we try to get as much representation as possible, and for at least one of the folks in that group to have a kind of a national footprint. So then we kind of go through an iterative process with that group of experts to refine the work process schedule and the RTI outline and come to a consensus. And then ultimately we then put that through our editorial process and submit it to Office of Apprenticeship at DOL. Next slide. And all the frameworks, sorry, I should have said this before we advance. All the frameworks and the other resources we've created are on our website, which are apprenticeships.urban.org. So where we are today, as I mentioned, we're in the final 6 weeks, so we're very close. There's been about 60 that we've already completed, so 55 of the frameworks that have been approved by Office of Apprenticeship, and most of which have been published on our website and have bulletins associated with them that the department releases. Some are have been approved but aren't quite published yet. They're in kind of intermediate phase, and then there's another 4 that OA currently has that we've completed that they're just doing their review and due diligence on. And then there's just over 20 more that we are wrapping up in these last few weeks. And so hopefully we will exceed our goal of 80 by a couple. And the frameworks kind of span pretty much all the industries where there are apprenticeships, traditional and advanced manufacturing, education, finance and insurance, healthcare, IT, professional service. We've got several that are really public sector focused, and then several that are in the kind of supply chain and logistics space. Next slide. I think this is my last one. So the final thing that I'll mention, which is not specifically about the occupational frameworks, but that we've created through our TA Center, is the Registered Apprenticeship Standards Library. Basically, we sought to solve this issue. Like the frameworks, the library is just like another resource to kind of make building an apprenticeship easier for folks, for employers, for sponsors, training providers. And the idea behind it is to have one place where folks can go to access program standards that have been approved. So nothing like this in as comprehensive a fashion existed before. And credit to our partners with Workhands, who have been the kind of IT geniuses behind the website, which is apprenticeshipstandards.org. So there they have currently over 2,000 standards that includes work processes and related instruction outlines. There are over 35 states represented in it. And it's been, getting a lot of traction since its launch, with over 73,000 visits and almost 4,000 downloads so far. One important caveat is that Workhands has been working with Office of Apprenticeship to get standards that are currently just live in Rapids that have been federally approved. And my understanding is that's still in process. And so once they iron all that out, I believe the number of standards on there will double. I think there'll be over somewhere between 4,000 to 5,000 standards just once they get in everything that's currently in Rapids. So it's a really important, it's a really great resource. And if you go on there, you can search for standards by SOC code, Rapids code, just occupational title, or you can even, I believe you can just kind of search for a skill and see where that skill fits into different work processes. So it's a great resource to help make kind of at least give a starting point and give folks who are especially new to apprenticeship a sense of what do I need and what's already been accepted and approved.
Hey, Harry, just before we move on to hear from Josh, we have a couple of sort of clarifying questions in the chat. I wonder if we could just jump to those. Is that okay?
That's good. Was that from me or Harry?
Yeah, it was for Harry, but yeah, okay, good. So there's a question for you. There are existing frameworks for most, if not all, registered occupations on apprenticeship.gov under Occupation Finder. Are these taken into account in the apprenticeship standards? How do these fit together?
Are those without clicking the link, are those standards that have been approved?
Yeah, these are all standards on apprenticeship.gov. You
Okay.
go into resources and then occupation finder.
Yep.
And if it's a registered occupation, it will tell you it's registered, and then it gives you a hybrid, a competency based, and a
Hmm.
time-based framework. Now, some of them are more built out than others, but it's
Yeah.
for every occupation.
Okay. Yeah. So this is kind of what I was referencing earlier in our process, where that would be like the starting point. We would absolutely start with we have our teams go to that page and do the search if it's apprenticeable occupation, and kind of use those as at least one and certainly an important input. But yeah, as you've probably noticed, some of them aren't too heavy on the detail. So if you look at one of those and then you look at one of our frameworks, there's typically far more detail and nuance to the frameworks. But yeah, we definitely look at those and take those into account.
Thank you. And then Courtney, you've got your hand up. Is this a clarifying question? Courtney
I think,
Halsey?
I think that's Shonda, not Courtney.
Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Hey, how you doing? Question for, yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, Courtney Halsey is fantastic.
No,
But at any
exactly.
rate, she's on our
I'm done.
team,
Now
so
I can see you in your little square.
I claim her. So one thing I will say, John, so a couple of questions. Number one, as you're pulling standards out of Rapids and looking at them, they're each individually being looked at, correct? The reason I say this is because when we go in and look at our state occupations that were supposedly uploaded into Rapids on behalf of Kansas, probably a quarter or more of them are totally inaccurate. So the occupation might say heavy truck driver, and when you look at the actual, Appendix A, it's for a massage therapist.
Huh.
There are multiple instances of this. And we've requested DOL to fix it, and I don't know that it's been fixed. I mean, honestly, we're just kind of, I mean, some of them are getting fixed, but it's taking a while. Um, Additionally, I am a little bit concerned with, and this goes full circle, but the disconnect um, between ETA and the USDOL. So as decisions are being made about nationwide standards and apprenticeship just in general, some of their grants dashboards, which are tied to occupations, that they're trying to show sort of the return on investments that they're making with some of their grants, the dashboards and the participant numbers on there are inaccurate. I mean, they're just inaccurate. We just had a call with them to say, hey, our numbers are not correct. They need to get corrected. And there's question on whether it needs to be, updated and when it needs to be updated and things like that. So I just have concern overall with the information that they have that they're portraying as, correct and accurate, and whether the correctness and the accuracy is there. The last thing I will say, John, and I'll point out that I do think it's important for AFA to continue to push and for even work hands to push too, is that national standards are great. I understand the value proposition behind them, but there still needs to be a discussion with the employer. It's not a great idea, in my humble experience, to tell an employer, here's what your standards are needing to be, this is what they need to look like, and this is what you need to follow. That's not the value proposition behind registered apprenticeship. Usually it's a guide. Here's a great place to start. Let's sit down and think through, is this actually what's happening out on the job? And make sure that those conversations are being had with upper level management, HR, as well as, folks that are out on the job or down on the floor, making things happen and customizing those on the job schedules to meet that specific employer need. Even though the words don't look the same and they're not in the same order as federal standards, they can still be meeting that threshold.
Jonathan, thank you so much. That's great. And I think you're anticipating some of the conversation to come here. Just in the interest of time, I'm just going to ask Katrina, keep your hand up because we'll come back to you. But I think we'll pass this on to Josh so Josh can talk a little bit about what's next on some of the apprenticeship standards and guidelines work. So Josh?
Yes, thank you. And I promise I didn't set Shonda up to keep me up for some of those things, but you did a good job anyway, Shonda. Thank you. So we're going to
I
just
aim to please, Josh.
I appreciate it. Very quickly, I want to run over some of the new project that we will be picking up. And I just want to start out by saying that this is a place with all the transition that's going on and all of the changes that have been going on. I am proud to see that the DOL and Office of Apprenticeship are continuing this kind of work. And we're able to pick up from the strengths of what has been built and keep building on those things. So what you're about to hear is still in its nascent stages. Really won't even be able to start with this work until June 1, which used to sound a lot further away than it is. But what we have now is the National Project on Apprenticeship Standards and Interoperability, which is a title way too long, so we call it PASI, P-A-S-I. It's not PASI, P-A-S-I is PASI because PASI sounds passive and that ain't us. This is a cooperative agreement between the U.S. Department of Labor, the Alabama Commission on Higher Education, and then the lead agency that is, or the lead organization that's going to be implementing the work is CBEN, the Competency-Based Education Network. And there's a long and unnecessary disclaimer there at the bottom that you can read if you want to. So not to belabor the organizational structure, but this is a very strong representation by the current agency, the current administration, that they are going to continue to fund this work. We've seen other places where things are getting cut off and things are getting turned off, and that is, you know, there's a whole nother debate to be had about what's getting chopped. But at least in this case, this is still a focus, and there's still funding being put in this direction. So go ahead to the next slide, please. All right, so what are we going to do? PASI strengthens the U.S. apprenticeship system through a 1, state-led, 2, employer-driven, and 3, competency-based approach to vetting, developing, validating, sharing occupational standards. So in the prior effort, as John was just describing, they were creating the standards, they were building out national occupational frameworks, and that was being done in a centralized way, right? With a central hub. Urban was doing a lot of that work and has developed a lot of those NOFs, National Occupational Frameworks. I'm a user of them. I believe in them. I advocate for them. I think it's a good idea. But what we're going to be doing here relates directly to what Shonda was just mentioning. Those are the frameworks. Those are just guidelines, right? That's the starting place. And there are examples to what a previous commenter mentioned. Okay, there's already examples on apprenticeship.gov. There's stuff on people's websites. These things exist all over the place. So we're going to be taking a field-driven approach. We're going to be looking at what is out there. And instead of us, PASI, being a centralized unit that is going to create the gold standard that we're going to hand out to the country, we're going to look at what is available in the country and surface the gold standard that is out there. So just super high level core activities that we're going to be starting with. The first thing we want to look at is what we're calling a high impact occupation assessment. Alabama has a version of this. Several other states have a version of it. In Alabama, we use a 5-part test to determine what we will build apprenticeships for and what we will spend state dollars and time and resources on. Some of the things included in that are, is it 70% of the median wage? Is it got projected growth over the next years of a certain amount, like that? Now, we're not saying we're going to take Alabama's model and make everybody in the country do it. We're going to convene the people in the country, the state apprenticeship directors, the OA directors, people, intermediaries, employers, and talk about, well, what are those characteristics that we need to be looking for? Because let's face it, we can't boil the ocean. Where are we going to focus our time, effort, and energy? Now, this might eventually become part of an apprenticeability determination process. This is something that would be run in parallel in the background, that we want to improve the overall apprenticeability determination. But that's not the ultimate goal of this. This is to help us focus. The second part there is quality framework work processes. We're going to be developing essentially a rubric that anybody can use. And I keep saying we, I want you to understand we are convening and we are coordinating this activity. We, Josh and Paisley, are not going to be telling you what makes a quality work process. We're going to be asking you and building a tool that everybody can use. And we'll know we got it right when everybody's a little dissatisfied with it. Right? Everybody's not going to love it. We can't force anybody to use it, but we'll at least be operating from a common framework. When we say, well, what does a good work process look like? It can't just be, oh, I'll know it when I see it. Well, what are you looking for? That's going to help in standardizing the processes across the board. It's going to help our employers. It's going to help people who are writing new work processes, new sets of standards. We are going to increase participation in the standards library. One of the things that Urban, I think, just killed it with Work Hands and that National Standards Library, that is a tool that we really need to lean into using, and we need to get everybody putting everything in there. So in our first year, that's going to be a big initiative, is working with individual states, everybody across the board, intermediaries, everybody. What do you have? What examples do you have of existing work processes that are in use? I don't want just stuff that's been in your filing cabinet or your 100-year-old Dropbox. Get that stuff into the library so we can be using it. From there, we're going to use the HIO test to establish, okay, where are our priorities? What are we going to look at? And then we're developing a state-by-state vetting process. So we're going to use that vetting process, and let's just pick something like machinist, right? We're going to say, let's pull for this quarter, we're going to pull machinist work processes out of the library. We're going to use that tool that we just talked about, that framework for quality assessment. It'll assess both the RTI and the on-the-job learning, and we are collectively going to evaluate. So if I'm the director of Alabama, I'm going to go in there and I'm going to look at all the examples for machinist, and I'm going to say, hey, that would meet standards in Alabama. I could put a stamp of a seal of approval, pre-vetted. If you brought me as a new employer, a new sponsor, you brought me this set of standards, I could approve that. Now, we know everybody's got different forms and all of that kind of stuff. One of the things Work Hands is going to be doing is in this new iteration, they're going to be using machine learning to take all of that stuff we have and put it into a much more common and comparable form inside the standards library. So it'll be easier for us to do that cross comparison. So if I'm the director in Alabama, I look at this thing, I say, yep, that would be passable here. It gets a little stamp now in the library, boom, pre-approved by the state of Alabama. Over time, as we all evaluate those, we will then see, hey, there are 25 examples of machinist standards in the library. That one's good to go in Alabama, but I'm a multi-state employer, and here's one that's good to go in 18 different states. That's the one I want to use. And so we're surfacing from the field what is the national standard instead of us trying to tell people what is the national standard. That's going to increase portability. It's going to help our multi-state employers. And over time, that's going to move us towards a much more common framework. In Harry's description of what they do in England and other countries, right, we're starting with this one, here's the guide, the German Chamber of Commerce tells everybody, here's what it is. That's not going to fly in the US. We can't go from the what we have to that. So that will simplify and expedite registrations. It's going to make it much easier for an employer, a job seeker, a state agency, anybody to go there, look at that library and see, hey, these are the ones that are really the most broadly acceptable. But we will still also do just what John was describing. We'll also be building new occupational frameworks where examples don't exist, or where there are only a few examples and they're not particularly great. We'll use a very similar process to what John just described to build out new national occupational frameworks for new and emerging industry sectors. I'll tell you one thing we won't do, though, is build hypothetical occupational frameworks. There's got to be employers. Somebody needs to be standing there saying, chop, chop, I need employees who can do this thing. Come help me build this. When we build the first one of those, one of the weaknesses of the system has been the very first person to the table set the standard, and then everybody else like, well, there you go. You got to compare to that. That's not what we're going to be doing here. We will build sample work processes and we'll help first one-off employers, and then we'll be doing that same vetting process over time. Now we start to see some commonalities. Now we start to see some places where this is a best practice. All right, I have way overshot my time already. Didn't matter that I was running the clock. We have about, 5 hours worth of stuff to talk about in 5 minutes. Here are the first two big rollout events that we have scheduled. We'll be doing a lot of smaller preliminary meetings as we're building out structures and making plans. But if you don't have these two things on your calendar already, add them onto your calendar. The NASTAD conference, those of you who have been to that before, it's always great. This year it's going to take on an even bigger role and be a more important meeting. So even if you're not from a state apprenticeship agency, that doesn't matter. Come to this conference. This is where we're going to be having the first real work groups and work sessions talking about how PASY is going to operate. NASTAD will be right in the heart of that. And then the competency-based exchange network, they're very, very involved with colleges, universities, building out competency-based education programs. So rather than us going in there and saying, oh, well, let's figure out how we can articulate this backwards into some credit, they are also saying, hey, we can see by your demonstration on the job or your demonstration of these competencies that this equates to this thing, and we can give you credit up front. It's not a later on we try to evaluate it and give you credit or do some prior learning assessment. This is as you go, you're getting credit for college and university stuff built in. So CBEN will be very heavily focused on the RTI side of the equation. Urban will be helping us a lot with the OJL side of the equation. We'll be building out that framework, attend to both of those things. Only 4 minutes over what I promised you, Harry. Keep going.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Josh. And thank you, John. Just giving you a sense of sort of what's out there. So what we're going to do in the remaining 25 minutes or so that we have, by the way, I neglected to say, but as with others of these sort of presentations, Harry and I and the AFA team will be hanging out a little bit after the formal conclusion of the webinar. We will not be recording the session, and you're free to hang out, ask other questions, comment on the comments, just sort of a general chat. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to first off just start with a little bit high level sort of reflections on guidelines and standards, what's been working, what's not been working, where are there challenges in this work. Love to hear that, particularly as it relates to systems that the Department of Labor might be able to change or adjust. It was really great to hear and see in the chat. Actually, it wasn't great to see, but it's great to surface in the chat that some of the flexibility around standards seems to be not consistently interpreted by ATRs. That's something we can comment on and try and redirect the Department of Labor on. So love to hear that. We'll also take questions for the last two presenters. So Katrina, you're going to be up in just a second here. And then we do want to leave a little bit of time just to surface other kinds of regulatory issues around standards, guidelines, or other actions that seems to be getting in the way of the expansion and growth of quality apprenticeship. And we'll certainly be touching on that again throughout the rest of our webinars on this topic, but do want to get to that. So let's start with some general comments, reflections, and questions. Katrina, you're first up. Katrina, are you there?
Yes, you have to give me a few minutes to find everything. Give me a
Excellent.
second.
You're on.
Yeah, sometimes it's hard to remember your question after you, but I just wanted to agree with Shauna, or want to be Courtney, that was just speaking about all of that. The one thing that we find is that, let's say we're looking for drafters and we've gone in there and every single occupation for drafters is exactly the same, no matter if the title is different. Like all the competencies are exactly the same in those occupations. So that's one thing that we have found and we've struggled with a lot, even like customer service, any type of customer service. We go into the work processing schedule and to a different title, and it's exactly the same thing as the other four that we looked into. So I'm glad we're having these conversations to clear up all that mess, because it is a huge mess when you start looking for different occupations to work with different companies, especially when they're tailored to specific needs.
Thank you, Katrina. That's great. The understanding some of the downsides or the implementation challenges of a standards regime. That's great. Excellent. Other thoughts, reactions to or questions on sort of general about the framework, for frameworks and guidelines for apprenticeship.
John, this is Adriana with Bloomboard. I obviously live, I mean, maybe not for everybody else here, but I live in the education space, right? So we deal with national and state standards all the time. And one thing that I've been thinking about a lot since this executive order came down is actually the rollout of the Common Core state standards in education and how those were adopted by so many states so quickly. And kind of regardless of, anybody's perceptions on effectiveness or utilization or what have you on that, I think that Race to the Top is a good example for apprenticeships to look at of how an initiative like that can unite the Federalist system so quickly. And I haven't figured it out, but it's just something that I've been thinking about and wanted to mention.
I like that mining other experience. Thank you, Adriana. Other comments? Oh, Rick, you've got your hand up. Rick Raffi.
Sure. Yeah, so I wrote in the chat about there's an emphasis on competency-based programs, which is great. But are there any considerations around time-based standards that would comply with minimum periods? Because my understanding is to qualify as an apprenticeship, it really needs to occupy like 6 months, or it might vary. And I don't know the rules on state versus federal on that, and anything around reciprocity between that. So because we're working with employers that have federal that want to be in qualifying for state funding, and anything that unifies that is great.
John, do you mind if I answer that?
Please, Josh. Yeah.
Yeah, because Rick, I appreciate the question. Give me an opportunity to clarify. When I say competency-based, time-based programs are still obviously going to be a huge component of this. It's my belief, and as I've talked to our time-based programs across the state of Alabama, even time-based programs need to know what competencies they're looking for to be demonstrated during that time. The difference is just a matter of, in a time-based program, I'm saying for 250 hours, I want you to demonstrate competency, take training in this, and demonstrate competency in these areas. One of the weaknesses of time-based programs that we inherited was that it was just a block of time, and it didn't say really, besides a very light description, just say safety, 250 hours. That's not sufficient. Even if you're measuring it in version of time, what do you need to be doing? So we'll be helping to build out the competencies that are being measured in that block of time or by individual competency attainment. This is in no way saying, oh, we're getting rid of or ignoring time-based programs. And to your other point about the requirement, all apprenticeship programs require at least a year of on-the-job training. None of that stuff is going away. It's still 29, 2,000 hours, all of that kind of stuff.
Can I just add to that on some international examples? So I think the international norm is competency based, but in reality, in the detail, it's really both. So as Josh was describing, you have a competency-based apprenticeship, but overall you have a minimum length of time for the apprenticeship, and that's seen as a really important quality bar that can't be moved. So I think we're always going to have some kind of blended system there, and as Josh was saying, the important bit is the assessment of quality and the protection of. The assessment of quality, of competency, and the protection of quality standards.
Erwin, you've got your hand up from California. Great to have you with us.
Hi. A couple of questions. I think Josh's approach strikes me as less bureaucratic than the normal image that I think most apprenticeship programs have. And I think that's an issue that somebody needs to be doing some research on how the younger generations in the workforce respond to the idea of apprenticeships. Many companies have probation periods, and I think there's an opportunity to kind of integrate probation with this kind of approach that companies might buy into. But if you just say, we have an apprenticeship program, that does not convey the kind of idea that, well, why would a company want that unless there's a critical shortage of personnel in some area. So I think that's an area that I think needs looking into.
Thank you, Erwin. Other comments or reactions on the notion of guidelines, standards, stories about how you've tried to use them and it hasn't worked, stories about how you've used them and it has worked, anything sort of germane at this stage. We'll take another 2 or 3 more comments on this. Does anyone have anyone can speak to having used the urban products in working with an employer or working? It'd be great to hear that story. Anyone want to share that?
John, I'll say we used them in Alabama quite a bit when it was a new occupation that we didn't have standing examples of. That was the place we engaged them the most, and I've talked with Urban and on their behalf about that in the past. That's the place where those really come in clutch, because it's a process when you got to drag out from an employer who's not used to thinking about the work they do in terms of competencies and that kind of thing. It really expedites the time to registration just to start with something they can react to that is in their terminology and is well-founded and is based in research. And it also has given us some credibility with them, because there's no way, I don't care who you are on this call or in this country, you're not a subject matter expert in every occupation that there is. So coming in the door and then and exposing yourself as such with nothing to back it up, sometimes the employers look at you and go, yeah, but you don't understand my industry. No, I don't. I know how to build training programs. I don't understand your job, but I do have some well-founded documented research from people who do the kind of thing you do, and that buys you some credibility in that initial stage. Now it's up to you to capitalize on that going forward, but that's been one of the big benefits for us.
Thanks, Josh. Any stories about where the standards have been problematic or difficult? We in the chat there was a comment about how there was some inflexibility around standards, and we heard comments about how you couldn't change the title because the title had already been identified. Are there any other anything people want to add to that? Let me then. Oh,
John,
yeah, please.
I wanted to just
Go ahead.
respond to something that Shonda said a little while ago, which was the kind of quality control aspect in the standards library with WorkHands. So one thing that I know they've done is if there are a bunch of standards that are literally or just about exactly the same, they won't list it 20 times. They'll just put it in there once. So that kind of level of duplication won't be in the standards library. On the like quality assurance of making sure that the title and the competencies match up, I'm not sure how deep they go on that. But that's a good question for Patrick, and I can follow up with him on that to see if they would be able to catch those kind of inconsistencies with standards that are in Rapids or coming from other sources.
Yep. Sounds like a good machine learning kind of task. Try and get smart about
Yeah,
that.
I know they're using it on some of like their tasks, but that specifically I'd have to ask him about.
Excellent. Let me just ask one other question. There's been some comments in the chat. I just want to invite anyone to add anything in the discussion, which is about adoption. Oh, Mary, I'll get to you in a second. About adoption. How do we try to promote adoption? So, we've heard, the race to the top and the Common Core as maybe a model that might be looked at. Bruno actually put in a reference to some of the charter school history and how we might be able to mine that information. Any other thoughts or reactions, suggestions on how we think about adoption of standards in this system? And then Mary, I'll take your comment in just a second, and unless it's on this exact point. Any comments on that? It is a thorny question. All right. Well, I guess you'll leave your AFA team to try and sort that out. Mary, comment from you.
Yeah, hi, Mary Wirtz, National Center for Grow Your Own. Hey, John Murata. I was about 10 minutes tardy to this call, and so if this got discussed at the top, my apologies. But I guess I'm still trying to wrap my mind around, familiar with the work that Urban's done, been part of it in my previous role, have used it myself. But the relationship between this, what Josh is talking about, and then national guideline standards as published via OA Bulletin from time to time, of which sometimes there's like 3 or 4 for one occupation. I guess the question is more for Josh. How are those going to be considered by Pacey, not Passy? And just like how does that piece of this puzzle fit into all of this? Thanks in advance.
Yeah, sure. National guideline standards will go into work hands, just like every other set of standards that are there. The biggest thing I say work hands, into the National Apprenticeship Standards Library, they'll be one of the sets of guidelines that are in there so that everybody has ready, easy access to them. In a set of national guideline standards, though, and really in any full set of standards, we're talking about all the way down to things like ratio and wages and all that kind of stuff. That's not really what we're after here. That's so unique in every case, state by state. If you want to just bog the whole thing down immediately, start talking about, well,
Let's start with ratios. Yeah.
You'll just end it. You'll be done. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the training components. What is the RTI and what is the OJL? What are those things? And does the RTI actually support the OJL? Is this, these things tied together? So even though, yes, we'll take all of those national occupational guideline standards, put them in there. We're putting everything in there we can find if it's actively in use. And then asking the people who are the users thereof to say, which of these do you like the best? Well, not even do you like the best. You don't have to rank them. Which of these would you accept if they came to you? And then by virtue of the fact that you'll see, hey, that one's only accepted in one place, or only endorsed. One of the other things we plan to do down the line is give an opportunity to, we haven't figured out exactly how to do this, either show how many employers and sponsors are using that one in the country, or show the number of apprentices maybe associated with that. One of the sideline components of this work is we're also going to be working on, brace yourselves, a new rapids numbering system. A whole new way of using rapids numbers, because they don't mean anything to anybody except rapids. And so what we'd love to have is a decodable set of numbers that ties into ONET, SOC, whatever, so that we can work backwards from that. But then when you get that, once again, we can't force, I know there's a lot of states, there's at least 12 SAAs that don't use rapids. We can't make people use these, and not trying to make them do that. But if we have a common set of numbers, now we start to get some better data. And so we can say it's much easier to pull, everybody give me how many apprentices you got for occupation so-and-so using work process number so-and-so. And we can really start to pull those best practices up. But long answer, short question, guideline standards will go in there, but we're not getting tied up in ratios or how many wage bumps do you have to have and all that. That is completely unique to each state. And sometimes unique to municipalities.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So we're going to conclude with a sort of open mic opportunity for folks to opine on other regulatory aspects of apprenticeship that we're dealing with, maybe spending disproportionate time on relative to the overall goal to expand quality apprenticeship. And so I want to just use this as an opportunity for quick hits. You don't have to describe in a lot of detail, but quick hits on other sorts of recommendations that AFA should be promulgating sort of while we're at it on this executive order. So this could be an opportunity to talk about approval processes. It could be an opportunity to talk about review processes, reporting requirements. Anything is sort of fair game. So I invite you to either put in the chat or a quick comment in the discussion on any of those regulatory issues that you think could be adjusted, changed, or re-examined. Anything from the group here? Anything from the group?
John,
This
is Sherry Craney. I put in a chat, but just as we're trying to scale, it's just really important that if we're doing this nationally, that there is a commonality across the ATRs, and one will say one thing and one will say a different. And I put it in the chat, my level of frustration is off the charts because we have had like no response. And now knowing that there's less people in the administration of this, it's like, yes, we want to move it, but there's not as many people doing the work. So I think, how are we internally, what are the logistics that they're doing internally to help us in growing the apprenticeships in a way that will scale across the nation effectively?
Excellent. Thank you for that feedback. That's great, Sherry. Other comments? Other comments on regulatory issues that we might raise?
Well, Rick certainly highlighted the, anything that we could do to enable just consistency and reciprocity between federal and state. You can't even get many states to use the federal template. And so for a company that's trying to operate in numerous states, the additional burdens it's discouraging. It's just plain discouraging. It's opposite of what they in words say they want to do.
Excellent point. Thank you. And I think there's some openness to hearing those kinds of concerns. So that's great. Last comment before we break here. Anybody, any last comments before we break? So listen, I want to thank everyone for your participation in this session. We continue with this process next week, where we're going to be taking on a youth apprenticeship as our topic area as we are developing recommendations for the administration. Our analysis of looking at the million active apprenticeship goal suggests that a fair amount of those are going to be coming from youth apprenticeship. And so we need to be thinking about how we're building our capacity to roll out apprenticeship among younger populations. And so we're looking forward to that conversation. And then we have two remaining sessions after that. The first focusing on the artificial intelligence order and looking at the role of apprenticeship around artificial intelligence occupations, and then thinking about the role of states and how states are going to have a critical role in helping with the with the million active apprenticeship goal. How should we be thinking about the role of states? I also want to take just a moment here to plug a webinar that we've got coming up next week. This is looking at how apprenticeships are powering skills-based hiring. It's with our partners at Cyber Up, and that'll be on Wednesday, the 28th. All information on all these webinars is on the apprenticeshipsforamerica.org website under our events tab. Let me just invite Harry if there's any other comments we should make before we break here.
No, I think that's everything. Thanks, John. Just one responding to a comment in the Cyber about when the session next week is. It is on Tuesday, the 27th, 11 Pacific, 2 Eastern.
3 Eastern. Great. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Anyone who wants to hang out, we'll be hanging out for informal conversation. And I think we can stop the recording. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.